Hello everyone, welcome to the session on part 3 of module 1 of Programming Paradigms course code CS403. In this particular session we will be covering the topics scope and lifetime of variables, scope rules, nested subroutines, modules and referencing environments. I am Dr. Renu Mary Daniel, Assistant Professor, Department of CSE, RSET. Once again, welcome to this session. So as we have already discussed, a binding is the association between a name and the thing it names. It can be the name of a data type, it can be the name of a looping construct, it can be the name of a variable, and the scope is the region of a program where this particular binding is active. In most modern languages, the scope of a program is determined statically at compile time, and we have seen a few examples pertaining to static and dynamic scoping. A scope is the body of a module, class, subroutine or structured control flow statement, sometimes called a block. In C family languages, it will be delimited with the curly braces. So whenever you see open curly braces and close curly braces, essentially we are creating a block, and whatever is declared within that block will be only visible within that block, and its scope will not be available outside that block. In static scoping, scope of bindings are determined at compile time, whereas in dynamic scoping, the scope of bindings are determined at runtime. Now let's discuss the difference between scope and lifetime of a variable. The scope of a variable is the region of the code where the variable can be accessed, while the lifetime of a variable is the time duration during which the variable is in a valid state and its value is retained. For automatic or local non-static variables, in C, their lifetime is limited to their scope. In other words, automatic variables are automatically destroyed once the scope in which they are created ends. Hence the name automatic to begin with. Let's understand this concept with an example C program. We know that in C there are several storage classes like automatic, extern, register and static. So all local variables by default belongs to the storage class auto or automatic. So here in this program, in the main function we have a local variable I, and it is by default its storage class will be auto. So from outside the main function, if we try to print the value of I, we know that we are going to get an error because the lifetime as well as the scope of I is limited within the main function. Now what we are doing here is we have a for loop. And the loop executes 3 times. Within the for loop we have a printf statement, and within the printf statement, the statement iteration %d value equal to %d I comma fun I will be executed 3 times, and the value of I will be passed to a function named fun. And inside the function fun we have a static variable C which is initialized as 20. We know that static variables retain their value between function call. So within the function fun, we are incrementing the value of the static variable C each time with the argument passed to fun, and that resultant value is returned by the function. So the first time when the function is called, the argument passed will be 1, x value will be equal to 1. So C is equal to 20 plus 1, which is 21, and the first statement to be printed by the program will be iteration 1 value equal to 21. Next time when the loop executes, the argument passed is 2. However, notice that static variables retain their value between function calls. So C value will be now 21 and x value is 2. So the resultant value becomes 21 plus 2, which is 23. So iteration 1 value equal to 23 will be printed. Similarly, during the third iteration 3 value equal to 23 plus 3, that is 26 will be printed. Now notice the statement, one statement which I have commented in the main function, that is printf %dc. I am essentially trying to print the value of the static variable from within the main function. What do you think will happen if I uncomment that statement? If I uncomment that statement, as you have guessed, since the scope of the static variable C is limited within the subroutine where it is declared, I'll get an error in this case. So the scope of a static variable as that of a local variable is limited within the subroutine or block where it is created. However, its lifetime and its value is retained throughout the program lifetime. I hope you have understood the difference between scope and lifetime of a variable. Now let's discuss the concept of scope rules. Scope rules of a programming language define the scope of variables and subroutines, which is the region of program text in which name-to-object binding is usable. For instance, in languages like C, C++, and Java, the scope of local variables is limited within the subroutine or block where it is created, while that of global variables is throughout the whole program. In static scoping, the bindings between names and objects can be determined by examination of the program text. It's also called as lexical scoping. We'll shortly see why it is called as lexical scoping. And most modern programming languages follow static scoping. And static scoping happens at compile time. In early BASIC, all variables are global and visible everywhere. In Fortran 77, the scope of local variable is limited to a subroutine. The scope of a global variable is the whole program text unless it is hidden by a local variable declaration with the same variable name. In Algol 60, Pascal and Ada, these languages allow nested subroutine definitions and adopt the closest nested scope rule. So we'll see how to work with nested subroutines and scope rules in nested subroutines very shortly. In C, static variables as well as Algol own variable, a saved variable has a lifetime that encompasses the entire execution of the program. Instead of a logically separate object for every invocation of the subroutine, the compiler creates a single object that retains its value between subroutine calls. Now let's start learning about the concept of nested subroutines. The ability to nest subroutines inside each other, introduced in Algol 60, is a feature of many programming languages including Pascal, Ada, ML, Scheme, Common Lisp, and Fortran 90. Other languages including C and its descendants allow classes or other scopes to nest. But C-based languages do not have nested subroutines. Algol style nesting gives rise to closest nested scope rule for binding from names to objects. Now let's discuss the concept of nested subroutine and the concept of closest nested scope rule with an example Pascal program. In computer programming, nested function or subroutine is a function which is defined within another function. The outer function is called the enclosing function and the inner function is called as the nested function. So in this example Pascal program, we have the outermost function called procedure P1. Now P1 has an argument A1 of type T1. Within P1 we have a variable X of type real, and then we have the first nested subroutine P2 which has an argument A2 of type T2. Then we have the innermost nested subroutine P3 which has an argument A3 of type T3. If you notice the comment within the begin and end part of the procedure P3, you can see what all are visible within P3. So all the objects arguments of the outer functions will be visible within the innermost nested subroutine. So within the inner nested subroutine, all the functions, all the objects of the other outer functions will be visible. For instance, A3 is visible within P3 obviously, A2 of outer function P2 is visible, X of the outermost function P1 is visible, as well as A1, argument A1 of P1 is visible within P3. If you come out of P3 to the body of function P2, now you can see that A3 is no longer visible in P2. That is, the argument of the inner subroutine P3 is not visible in the outer subroutine P2, and there we can only see A2, A1 and X. Similarly, you can see for procedure P4 which is nested within P1. So procedure P4 is nested within procedure P1, and within P4 the procedure F1 is nested, and we can see that in the body of function F1, nested function F1, we can see X of F1. This X of F1 has now hidden the scope of the X, the variable X which has the same name of the outermost function P1, Actually, f1 is a nested function within p1. However, since we have a local variable x within f1 with the same name as the x in p1, this x has hidden the 1 in p1. Then the other things that are visible are a5 of f1, a4 of p4 and a1 of p1. Similarly, when we come out of f1, in p4 what is visible is x of p1 is visible now, and a4 of p4 is visible, as well as a1 of p1 is visible. And when we come out of all the inner subroutines, all the nested subroutines, we are back in procedure p1. In procedure p1 we have x of p1 is visible, as well as argument a1 of p1 is visible. Now the closest nested scope rule says that to find the object reference by a given name, look for a declaration in the current innermost scope. If there is none, look for a declaration in the immediately surrounding scope. Continue outward, determining successively surrounding scopes until we reach the outer nesting level of the program where global objects are declared. If no declaration is found at any level, then it is a program error. Suppose we are currently inside procedure P3. We are inside procedure P3 and we want to search for argument A2. We want to search for the variable A2. First we will check within P3 if variable A2 is declared. It is not declared in P3. However, we know that all the objects of the outer enclosing subroutines will be also visible in P3. Hence, we will next check for the enclosing subroutine P2. If A2 is declared within P2, then it will be visible inside P3 also, and we can use that value. That is closest nested scope rule. Now we will see the concept of static scoping with nested procedures with an example adder program. So here you have two integer variables m and n. Both are global variables, and we have a procedure Laurel. And within the procedure Laurel, that is a function definition of Laurel, and within the body of the function Laurel we have another procedure called Hardy. So that is a nested procedure and Laurel is an enclosing procedure. Now we'll go on with the body of the main function. So we haven't yet called Laurel, so we won't be talking about that now. So within the main function, m is initialized as 50 and n is initialized as 100. Then we have a print statement in main n is equal to. So here you know that the global variable n's value will be taken up and it prints in main program n is equal to 100. Next we have a function called. So now Laurel will be called. The procedure Laurel will be called and the parameter 1 will be passed to Laurel. And the parameter name in Laurel is n. So the scope of the outer global variable n will be hidden in the procedure Laurel. Now within Laurel we have a print statement in Laurel m is equal to. So now it will check if there is a local declaration for variable m. Since there is no local declaration for variable m in Laurel, it will go to the global scope and it will take up the value of the global variable m, which is 50. So it will print as a second line of the output in Laurel m is equal to 50. Next print statement is in Laurel n is equal to. Now we know that the n value in Laurel is 1 because Laurel also has an argument named n. So that value will be taken up and it prints in Laurel n is equal to 1. The next line that you see, Hardy, is actually a function called to the inner function or the nested function Hardy. So the Hardy, the body of the subroutine Hardy will be executed, and that function has only one statement, that is in Hardy, one print statement in Hardy n is equal to. Now it will check if there is a local declaration for variable n. There is no local declaration for variable n in Hardy, so it will look for the enclosing subroutine if there is a declaration for n there. So we have a declaration for n there, so the value of that n will be taken up and the value n equal to 1 will be printed. Suppose n value was not declared there, then we will take the value of the global variable n here. So I hope you have understood this program, and the fact that you have to notice in this case is the nested subroutine Hardy can only be called from the enclosing subroutine Laurel. Notice that we can't call Hardy from the main program. Now let's discuss about static scope with static links. So as we have seen in the case of nested subroutines, a nested subroutine can be called only from the function that is enclosing it. And we have also learned while studying about stack memory allocation that for each active subroutine, its activation record along with all the information about the local variables will be pushed on to the call stack. Scope rules are designed so that we can only refer to variables that are alive. That variable must have been stored in the frame of a subroutine, activation frame of a subroutine. If a variable is not in the local scope for a nested subroutine, there should be a frame for the surrounding scope somewhere below on the stack. The current subroutine can only be called when it is visible, and a nested subroutine is visible only when the surrounding scope is active. Each frame on the stack contains a static link pointing to the frame of the static parent. Now let's see an example for static scope implementation with static links. So towards the left hand side of the slide, you can see a skeletal structure of a program. And we have an outermost subroutine A, which is the static parent of all the other nested subroutines. So A is the enclosing subroutine for the nested subroutines B and E. Now within the nested subroutine B, we again have two other nested subroutines C and D. That means B is the enclosing subroutine for nested subroutines C and D. And we have already discussed that a nested subroutine can be active only if its enclosing scope is active. So initially, let's assume that the subroutine A is executing, and that implies that its activation record is pushed on to the stack frame. So you can check out the figure shown towards the middle. So in that we can see that activation record of A is shown in the bottom. And after the activation record of A is pushed, suppose the subroutine E is called. So E is enclosed within A, and now the activation record of E gets pushed onto the stack. And from the activation record of an inner procedure or a nested subroutine, we'll have a link, a static link towards its parent. So you can see a link from the activation record of E to its parent A. Similarly, the subroutine B is a nested subroutine within A, and B can be called from A, and B is pushed on top of E, activation record of E, and B also has a static link towards its static parent, which is A. Now from within B, we can call the innermost subroutines C and D, which in turn have static link towards its parent B. So this is how static links are implemented. So subroutine C and D are nested in B. B is a static parent of C and D. B is nested in A. E also is nested in A. The static links form a linked list of static parent frames. Subroutine A is at nesting level 1 and C is at nesting level 3. When C accesses a local object of A, two static links are traversed to get to A's frame. So suppose in C we are trying to access a member of the outermost subroutine A, then we can traverse the link from C to B and from B to A to finally access that variable. I'm sure you all will be familiar with the concept of a variable being out of scope. Non-local objects can be hidden by local name-to-object bindings, and scope is said to have a hole in which the non-local binding is temporarily inactive but not destroyed. Some languages like Ada and C++ use qualifiers or scope resolution operators to access non-local objects that are hidden. So let's see this example procedure. So we have a procedure P1, which is an enclosing outer procedure, and P1 has a local variable X, and within P1 we have a nested procedure P2. Now P2 also has a local variable with the same name X as the outer procedure. Now this variable X within P2 effectively hides the scope of X in P1. So we say that there is a hole in the binding of X within P2. So when we come out of procedure P2, again the scope of X in P1 becomes visible. Now let's discuss how scope resolution operator in C++ can be used to make a global variable once again visible in a local scope. So here in this example C++ program, we have a global variable X which is initialized as 22, and within the main function you have another variable with the same name X, and it is initialized as 10. And we know that within the main function, now the global variable x, the scope of it is hidden, and whenever we refer to x in main, it always implies we'll take the value of the local variable x. In C++, we have something called a scope resolution operator, which will help us once again access the global variable, value of the global variable x. So if you execute the statement, cout value of global variable is, and use scope resolution operator preceding x, it will help us to access the global variable x, and the program will print the output as value of global variable x is 22. And if you do not use the access specifier, scope resolution operator, then it will simply print the value of the local variable 10. So we have already discussed about dynamic scoping. Let's just recap whatever we have learned. The scope rule in dynamic scoping is that the current binding for a given name is the one encountered most recently during execution. Remember that, look for the most recent binding of a variable in the case of dynamic scoping. It is adopted in early functional languages that are interpreted. APL, Snowball, early versions of Lisp and Perl are examples. Perl v5 allows you to choose scope method for each variable separately. Remember the keywords my and local. We have seen examples pertaining to each. It is this dynamic scoping is available as an option in Common Lisp. Using this scoping rule, we first look for a local definition of a variable. If it isn't found, we look up the calling stack for a definition. Now we'll see more examples of static and dynamic scoping. Here we have an example ADA program. We'll see how this program executes if we use static scoping. So initially we have two global variables m and n, both are integers, and within the main program m is initialized as 50 and n is initialized as 100, and we have the first print statement in main, which prints in main program n is equal to, and it will print n is equal to 100. After that, if you notice, we have a function call, and we are calling the subroutine Laurel, and we are passing the value 1 as the argument. And this 1 gets assigned to the actual argument n in Laurel. So it will get assigned to the actual argument n in Laurel, and the scope of the global variable n becomes hidden. So whenever we refer to the variable n within Laurel, we will always be using the value of the actual argument n, which is 1. Now within the function Laurel, we have two print statements. In the first print statement, we print in Laurel m is equal to. Now since we are using static scoping, the compiler will check if m is defined within Laurel. If it is not defined in Laurel, then it will look for the global scope, and we know that there is a global variable m and its value is 50, so it will print in Laurel m equal to 50. The next print statement is in Laurel n is equal to, and we know that here in this case it will take the value 1 and it prints in Laurel n equal to 1. Next what we have is a function call, and we are calling the function Hardy from the function Laurel. So now the function Hardy will execute, and within Hardy we have a single print statement in Hardy n is equal to. Since we are using static scoping, it will check the current scope for variable n. If it is not present, it will take the value from the global scope. So the value for n will be now assigned as 100, and it will print the value in Hardy n is equal to 100. Now after that, we will return back to the procedure Laurel, and we can see that the procedure Laurel also completes, and we'll return back to the main function after the statement where we call Laurel 1. So the next statement that we have is Hardy. That is again in the main function we are calling the function Hardy, and in this time also inside the body of Hardy we are printing the statement in Hardy n is equal to. So again we check whether n is defined in Hardy. If not, we will take the value from the global scope, and it prints in Hardy n equal to 100. So this is how the output looks if we use static scoping. Now we'll see what happens in the same program if we use dynamic scoping. So as we have seen, there are two global variables m and n. M is initialized as 50, n is initialized as 100. In main, the first statement to be printed is in main program n is equal to, and it prints the value of the global variable n 100. Next we have a function call. We are calling the procedure Laurel, and we are passing the parameter 1 to it, and this value will get assigned to the actual argument n in Laurel, and the scope of the global variable n will be hidden within Laurel. Within Laurel, we have the first print statement. In Laurel, m is equal to. Now, the compiler will check if m is defined or declared within the procedure Laurel. If it is not declared within Laurel, it will look for the most recent binding. We know that Laurel has been called directly from main. So, the most recent binding of m is equal to 50, the binding of the global variable m. So that value will be taken up and it prints in Laurel m equal to 50. Next we have the statement in Laurel n is equal to, and we know that here in Laurel we have an argument n which is assigned the value 1. So that value will be printed, it prints in Laurel n equal to 1. After that we have a function called to function Hardy, and Hardy gets activated, and within Hardy we have the print statement in Hardy n is equal to. Now the compiler will check if n is defined in the current scope of Hardy. If it is not defined, it will look for the most recent binding of n. We know that the procedure Hardy has been called from the procedure Laurel, and in that we have a binding of n to 1. So that value will be taken up, and now it prints in Hardy n is equal to 1. So if Hardy is called from Laurel, it prints in Hardy n is equal to 1. Now we'll return back to the function Laurel, which also completes, and the execution resumes to the line after Laurel is called in main. So it will resume at this point, and Hardy gets called from main. Now we know that once the execution of a subroutine finishes, its activation record and all the information associated with it will be popped out of the stack. So now when Hardy is called from main function, again it tries to execute the statement in Hardy n is equal to. Now it will check if the compiler will check if n is defined in the procedure Hardy. If it is not, it will check for the most recent binding, and remember that Laurel's activation record has already been popped out of the stack. So the most active binding for n now is the binding of the global variable n, which is 100. So if you call Hardy directly from main, then the value of n will be printed as 100. So hope you have understood the output of the program using dynamic scoping. Now let's see the implications of dynamic scoping. Each time a subroutine is called, its local variables are pushed on a stack with their name to object binding. We know that the corresponding activation record will be pushed onto the call stack. When a reference to a variable is made, the stack is searched top down for the variable's name to object binding. That is, it first searches the current activation record. Next it will search. If it is not present there, it will go one step down and check in the function which has called the current function and check if the variable is present in that particular function, and so on. After the subroutine returns, the bindings of the local variables are popped out of the stack. Different implementations of a binding stack are used in programming languages with dynamic scope, each with advantages and disadvantages. With dynamic scoping, name-to-object bindings cannot be determined by a compiler in general. It's easy for interpreter to look up name-to-object bindings in a call stack of declarations. Dynamic scoping is generally considered to be a bad programming language feature. It's hard to keep track of active bindings when reading a program text. Most languages are now compiled, or it is a compiler-interpreter mix. Now we'll see what are the data structures used for implementing static and dynamic scoping. To keep track of names in a statically scoped program, a compiler relies on a data abstraction called a symbol table. Symbol table is a dictionary. It maps names to the information the compiler knows about them. In a language with dynamic scoping, an interpreter must perform operations analogous to symbol table insert and lookup at runtime. Implementation of dynamic scoping tends to adopt either an association list or a central reference table. Now we'll see why static scoping is also called as lexical scoping. So in static scoping, the compiler will check for the scope of a variable in the current subroutine or block. If it is not present there, it will look for the global scope. Now look at this example Pascal program. In Pascal, the keyword program introduces a new scope which is commonly called a global scope. So the program above has one global scope, and the declared variables x and y are visible and accessible in the whole program. In the case above, the textual region starts with the keyword program and ends with the keyword end and dot. In that textual region, both the names x and y can be used. So the scope of those variables is the whole program. So this is how it looks. So simply by looking at the program and the keywords program and end, we can understand that the variables x and y are in global scope and it is available throughout the program. So now we have seen why static scoping is called lexical scoping. By looking at the source code and without even executing the program, we can determine purely based on the textual rules which names resolve or refer to which declarations. In Pascal, for example, lexical keywords like program and end demarcate the textual boundaries of a scope. So by simply looking at the variable names, you can understand to which scope it resolves to. Now let's discuss the advantages of scoping. Every scope creates an isolated namespace. Variables declared in a scope cannot be accessed from outside of it. You can reuse the same name in different scopes and know exactly just by looking at the program source code what declaration the name refers to at every point in the program. In a nested scope, you can redeclare a variable with the same name as in the outer scope, thus effectively hiding the outer declaration, which gives you control over access to different variables from the outer scope. Now we'll see how static scoping is implemented using a scoped symbol table. So this is the same code fragment which we had seen previously. This is a Pascal code. We have the keyword program essentially specifying the global scope which ends with the keyword end and dot. And variable x and y are both of type integer and its scope is visible throughout the program. So inside the scoped symbol table, we have the scope level. Here we know that the program doesn't have any nested procedures. So the scope level is 1, which implies it is the global scope and the scope name is global. The names declared in each scope and type is also recorded in the symbol table. The names are x and y and the type is integer. Let's now discuss about implementing nested scopes. So here we have the same program, Pascal program, program main, variable xy integer, and we have made a slight modification. There is a nested procedure called alpha within main, and alpha takes up an input parameter a which is of type integer, and within alpha we have a temporary variable y which is also of type integer. If you notice, in the global scope also we have variables x and y, both are real. However, in alpha, in the nested procedure, we have a local variable y. So now within alpha, the variable y, the integer variable y's scope will hide the scope of the global variable, real variable y. Now within the function or procedure alpha, what we are doing is we are adding up a value of a plus x plus y. So a is taken from the local scope which is passed as an argument to alpha, plus x is taken from the global scope. Remember that x is a real variable and y is also from the local scope. And finally you are adding up two integer values a and y to a real value x. Therefore the answer will also get implicitly typecast to real value. So the function will compute the real value x, resultant value x. So we have a single scope, the global scope, introduced by the program keyword. The global scope is at level 1. Variables x and y are declared at level 1. The program name main has subscript 0. So all these subscripts we'll be using while creating a scope symbol table. So we're just naming the program name main as subscript 0 because it is outside the global scope. This is to make it clear that the program's name is not in the global scope and it is in some other outer scope that has level 0. Here we'll see how we populate the scoped symbol table for a nested procedure. For this program, we use subscripts in variable or function names to refer to scoping levels. So if you notice in the first line, main has been given the subscript 0 to indicate that it's just outside the global scope. And within the global scope, we have variables x and y which are of type real. So both of them are given the subscripts 1 because they are at scope level 1. And if you notice in the scope information table, scope level 1 is named as global scope and there we have the variables x y and also the function name alpha in that scope. X and y are real variables, and now within alpha we have the variable y, and if you notice, y has been given the subscript 2 to indicate that it is at scope level 2, which is within the procedure alpha, and even the parameter passed to the function alpha is given the scope level 2, so it's also given the subscript 2. So within the scope level 2, we have, if you notice in the symbol table, we have the names declared within scope 2 are A and Y. So this is how the scope information table will be created. And just look at the diagram shown in between the code and the scope information table. There you can see that the scope of variable X is throughout the whole program. It's not getting hidden anywhere because we do not have another variable named X anywhere in the program. However, this is not the case with the variable Y. We know that in the global scope there is a variable named Y. Also in procedure alpha 1 there is a variable named Y, which is an integer variable. So the you can see a hole in that area, hole in the area where alpha is active. So in that area the scope of the global variable Y will be hidden, and at that point, if you notice, the A and Y of alpha 1 will be visible. Let's now discuss about blocks and local variable scope. In Algol, C and Ada, local variables can be declared in a block or compound statement. In C++ and Java, declarations may appear where the statements may appear and the scope extends to the end of the block. Local objects are stored in a part of a subroutine frame reserved for temporaries. Now let's see this example C program. So there we have three local variables, A, B, both are integers, and B is a floating point, D is a floating point variable. If you notice, all these declarations are done towards the beginning of the program, and then we have a simple printf statement wherein we are just adding up A and D. Next, if you notice, towards the right hand side there is an example Java program, and within the main function we are having the exact same program as in the case of C. So we have A initialized to 10 and B, both are integer variables. Now I am assigning the value of A to B, and even after that statement we can do declarations. I am declaring D as a double variable and its value is initialized as 10.0. So in C++ and Java, declarations may appear where statements may appear. Let's now discuss about modules and object scope. Modules are the most important feature of a programming language that supports the construction of large applications. Teams of programmers can work on separate module files in a large project. Modules encapsulate variables, data types, and subroutines such that objects inside are visible to each other, that is within the same module. Objects inside are not visible outside unless exported. Objects outside are not visible inside unless imported. A module interface specifies exported variables, data types, and subroutines. The module implementation is compiled separately and implementation details are hidden from the user of the module. There is no language support for modules in C and Pascal. Examples are Modular 2 modules, Ada packages, and C++ namespaces. Other examples are Java source code, Java class source files, and libraries. So we have already seen about referencing environment. The referencing environment of a statement is the collection of all names that are visible in the statement. Referencing environments are generally invariant during program execution. That is, values may change but name associations do not change. In a static scope language, the referencing environment includes the local variables plus all the visible variables in all of the enclosing scopes. A subprogram is active if its execution has begun but not yet completed. In a dynamic scope language, the referencing environment is the local variables plus all visible variables in all active subprograms. So as we have discussed, referencing environment is the set of all names that are visible at that current point of execution. So here is an example ADA program. We know that it is a statically scoped language. So we have a procedure example, which is the outermost procedure or the enclosing procedure. Within example we have two variables a and b, both of type int. Then we have the first nested procedure sub1. Now sub1 is having two integer variables x and y. Now at point 1, at this particular referencing environment, let's see which all variables are visible. So we know that at this particular point indicated by 1, the variables x and y of sub1 is visible, as well as the variables a and b of outer procedure example. Now the procedure sub1 finishes and we have another procedure sub2, which is also a nested procedure, which is nested inside example. And within sub2 we are having a variable x, which is an integer variable. Then we have another procedure sub3, which is nested inside sub2. So the enclosing procedure of sub3 is sub2 and the enclosing procedure of sub2 is example. Now within sub3 we again have a variable x. Now this variable x, the declaration of this variable x effectively hides the declaration, the scope of the variable x in sub2. So at this point indicated by number 2, at this referencing environment, let's see what all are visible. At this point x of sub3 is visible. Notice that x of sub2 is hidden and a and b of example, procedure example, is visible. Now at this point, after that sub3 ends and we are back in the body of sub2. Now at this point let's see what is visible. In sub3, in point 3, in referencing environment 3, x of sub2 becomes visible once again, and a and b, variables a and b of example, are also visible. Next, finally we have point 4. At this point, at this referencing environment, we know that only the a and b, variables a and b of example, are visible. So here is an example to show you how referencing environments will look like in the case of dynamically scoped languages. So let's start with the main function in this program. Within the main function we have two integer variables c and d, and from the main function we are calling the function sub2. Within sub2 we have two variables b and c, and notice that the variable c will be now active in sub2 while the c in main will be hidden. And from sub2 we are calling sub1. Okay. Now since this is a dynamically scoped language, at this point, at the referencing environment shown by number 1, let's see what all are visible. So obviously a and b of sub1 will be visible there. Further, c of sub2 will be visible and d of function main will be visible. Now let's look at the next referencing environment 2. At this point of execution, b and c of sub2 will be visible and d of main will be visible. And at the third referencing environment in main, only c and d of main will be visible. I hope you have understood this. Now let's discuss an important concept regarding binding of referencing environments. There are two types of binding of referencing environment. One is deep binding and the one is shallow binding. Deep or shallow bindings can make sense only when a procedure can be passed as an argument to a function. And we know that this feature is not available in many programming languages. Deep binding binds the environment at the time a procedure is passed as an argument. For example, f2 of f3, that is f3 is passed as an argument to function f2. It is the early binding of the referencing environment of a subroutine. Whereas in shallow binding, it binds the environment at the time a procedure is actually called. It is the late or dynamic binding of the referencing environment of a subroutine. Now let's discuss the concept of deep and shallow binding with the help of an example code snippet. So we have an outermost function, an enclosing function f1, and which has a variable x is equal to 10. There are two nested subroutines. First one is f2 and the one is f3, and then finally we have a statement f2 of f3 wherein we are passing function f3 as an argument to function f2. Now we know that in the case of deep binding, the binding of referencing environment happens when a function is passed as an argument to another function. So let's see what will happen if we use deep binding in this case. So we have the function f1 within which we declare x is equal to 10, and when we execute the statement f2 of f3, now f3 is the function which gets activated, and the f3 gets the environment of f1 and prints. So inside the function f3 we know that there is a single print statement, and since the referencing environment of f1 gets bound to f3, it will print the value x is equal to 10. Now let's see what happens if we use the concept of shallow binding. In the case of shallow binding, the binding of referencing environment happens during the actual function call. So first, when we execute the statement f2 of f3, we are first calling the function f2. So the referencing environment of f1 will get assigned to f2. So now within the function f2, we have another declaration for x wherein x is assigned the value 6, and then from f2 we are calling the function f3. Now f3 inherits the referencing environment, or it gets the referencing environment of the callee function f2, and now if we try to print the value of x, it will print the value 6 instead of 10 because f3 gets the referencing environment of f2. Now these binding rules are irrelevant in languages such as C and Modular 2, which only allows outermost subroutines to be passed as arguments. Whereas in ADA, it does not permit subroutines to be passed as arguments at all.